Good morning and afternoon, everyone, wherever you are today. My name is Joanne Maltagliati, and I represent Arctic IT, a native-owned technology company based out of Anchorage, Alaska. In the last year, Arctic IT, along with our sister company, designDATA, began a new chapter under our new management company, Doyon Technology Group, which has allowed our companies to invest in new technologies, including the one we're talking about today, artificial intelligence. Joining me today is our moderator, Erik Haas, Vice President of designDATA, based out of Gaithersburg, Maryland. Erik is joined by our two AI experts, Greg Starling and Patrick Ciccarelli. Greg is the head of our emerging technologies for our parent company, Doyon Technology, and Patrick is CEO of Varsity, a technology company based out of California. Now, before I turn the presentation over to Erik, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. The presentation will be recorded, and we'll send you a link to the recording once we're finished. We've scheduled the presentation for about an hour, and we've also carved out some time at the end to answer some questions. If you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat, and we will be monitoring those questions as they come in. So thank you for joining us, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erik.
Hello, Erik Haas here, Vice President of designDATA. Really happy to be with you all here today. AI is certainly a topic of interest and engagement for me, working to help our organization and others increase the level of total intelligence in the organization, and ultimately the value that we can all deliver to those we serve. I'm here, though, with two unbelievably accomplished leaders in AI, two individuals that certainly demonstrate their passion for AI, their accomplishments, and their strategic viewpoint on it, which is incredibly important every day. And so with that, I'll first turn it over to Patrick Ciccarelli to introduce himself, and then Greg Starling, and then we'll outline the agenda.
Thanks, Erik. Well, welcome everyone. Great to be here. Thanks to Doyon Technology for inviting me to this panel discussion. Excited to contribute and looking forward to hopefully giving you some information that's going to be useful. I'm the founder of Varsity Technologies. I've been in the technology space for 25 years, and I've been in the software and AI space for the past 8 to 10 years. I also run an AI startup in sales AI. Greg?
Yeah, so likewise, very excited to be here and be able to talk to you all today. Like they said, my name is Greg Starling. I have been in technology my entire adult life, starting in the late 90s. AI for about 20 years, and in what we're going to talk about today, generative AI for about the last 4. So excited to share kind of what we've learned and hopefully be able to help you all out.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Greg. Would you mind going back to the last slide for reference for those watching? So we're going to start off, the format's going to be about 40% of the time we're going to spend hearing from Greg and Patrick. Patrick is going to start us off talking about how to use AI as a force multiplier within your organization. And then Greg is going to touch on how to apply security and governance best practices to protect your organization, two critical aspects to successful AI implementation. That's going to be kind of short to the point, kind of the critical aspects that you need to know as context about both of those. But then we want to reserve the majority of the time for Q&A. Want to hear from you about what you're interested in hearing about, the insight that you're looking for from the panel. With that, we'll start off with a couple questions that have been burning from some of the those who have signed up for this webinar in advance, and then of course open it up to everybody else. And you can place your questions in written form by using the interface that you have open right now for GoToWebinar. With that, we'll turn it over to Patrick to talk about AI as a force multiplier.
Great, thanks so much, Erik. Well, I'm just excited to get started into this. I've spent the entire part of my career when I got into technology thinking about how will technology help people. And for the most of those 2.5, 3 decades, it's been spent trying to figure out, like, how do we connect the dots here to really help people versus in some cases, what I've seen, a nuisance almost. And AI presents that real opportunity for folks who are technology literate or not technology literate to really improve worker productivity. And that's really what we're talking about, worker productivity. How do you enhance everyone's jobs, their tasks, the quality of work that they bring to it. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So if we look at some of those areas on the next slide here, if you look at the areas of where AI worker productivity, where we've seen it and where I've been directly involved in hands-on cases of using it, are across all of these areas. Of course, it touches upon data analysis that you might have in finance or on the program side or on your direct services side, your product side, the administrative tasks, like how to use it as your own personal assistant, which that assisted AI model being really useful, project planning, but also not just in the assisted side, but also what you might refer to as a human integrated approach on many of these areas that we're looking at. So across all of them, from learning and research and so forth, the AI can really help your organization not only improve productivity, like the volume of work, more importantly, even the quality. We're going to take a look at that. But before we do, we're going to do a short poll, get your feedback. So please be on the lookout for this. I'll turn it over to Erik and Joanne.
Okay.
So that should be coming up on your screen there. Unfortunately, we don't get to vote on this, but take a look at this and give your impact, and we'll roll up some of those numbers to see how you assess relative to the some of the research we're going to talk about.
We have a few more coming in here, and then we'll close it. Okay. I will close.
Okay, thanks for everyone who participated in the poll. Some interesting facts here. I always like to look at the research to help us inform whether or not we really can make value out of a new technology. So look at some of our results here. How much has productivity increased within our workplace? We've got a wide range here, but kind of in those first three categories, I think that's a pretty good sample of where people might think AI might play a result in it. So let's take a look at what the research data shows, and you can compare on your own here. So this is a study done by the Nielsen Group, a research and consulting firm. They did a case study analysis back in June of 2023. So this is just at the beginning, really, for most lay people, just the beginning of the generative AI chat usage and what have you. And they saw that from their analysis of the research of those case studies, a 66% productivity gain. So that's pretty interesting to me. Obviously, that would get a lot of attention from anyone, any employee, any business owner, any manager. But I'm a little bit skeptical, as many of us are. Like 66% sounds pretty unbelievable. So let's take a look at the next research that came out a little bit later. Now, this one is a joint effort by MIT, Sloan Business School, Harvard Business School, and Wharton. And take a look at the breakdown. Now, this wasn't case study research. This was actually a larger sample pool of 700 individuals in a single organization. So very interesting, very ability to really apply and get a close look at how AI would affect them. And this study data, I think, feels much more relevant to it. A 12% increase in the tasks you're going to complete. So you're just seeing an increase in productivity, whether it's automation or be able to turn those things around, those items around quicker and get them done. But look at the bottom one. Like the bottom one is what really stands out to me, a 43% improvement in quality. And what's interesting here is that correlates pretty much on par with what we see anecdotally when we teach people to use AI inside of their organization. So these are hard numbers to ignore. And what I would tell you is these aren't research samples in the ether, academia. This is in business. This is happening right now. This has been happening for, well, the past year, really. And so we talk to customers often when they're asking, well, we'll get there. This is going to have a huge from a technology standpoint, a huge benefit to what your organization can do today. And of course, it's not without some planning, preparedness, and some risk management to do it at the same time. So let's take a look at it next. Let's look at how do we go through that use case? So everyone says, like, AI, I hear all about this. I attend these sessions. Like, so what do we do? And that's really what we want you to come away with here. So in this example, we're going to talk about a project manager. We're just going to look at that project planning example. So the first one is helping an individual create their plan. And so whether you have a senior project manager, which we had a case study where a senior project manager, we compared their work effort to develop plans with and without AI. So this is 20 years of project management experience, phenomenal effort there in terms of their ability to produce those plans and produce better plans and even capture things that even though they might not include them, they were able to say, hey, that's kind of interesting, but maybe not for this project, or include them. Now, but imagine the project coordinator, someone new to this role, or maybe really didn't get the coaching early in their career, getting the help of that assistant to build those project plans. So again, a very simple task. Now, this other one is a higher level complexity because most people aren't very good at estimating their time and planning them out. So we saw this where we saw an accuracy within 5%. And again, this is anecdotal, not based on the research, a 5% accuracy of the AI doing the time estimation versus a seasoned time estimator. So that's a pretty compelling argument. Obviously, every industry is different. All complexities are different. And then finally, which the project managers admitted they never had time for, is enhancing their project management work with all the resources that they need internally for their team, but also for the customer. So this is something that we were able to implement in the course of a very short period of time. And more importantly, not what we as the leadership or ownership level saw, but at the staff level, that value that they found out of it, that they actually saw them doing their work better in a more effective way. Let's move on here. All right, so let's talk about those productivity tools. You're like, okay, so maybe I could use this in my organization, but where do I begin? And although I have some experience on the development side on ChatGPT and Microsoft's products, I really want to turn it over to Greg, because Greg's got a much larger breadth of experience across these products. He's used them firsthand. Craig, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Patrick mentioned, I have not only have I used all these tools, I use all of these tools on a pretty daily basis. And so there are pros and cons of each platform, and we're going to get into some of the risks a little bit later, and maybe how you might want to go about implementing or not implementing. But from the biggest risk point of view, just kind of that bottom row of whether or not it trains on your data or not. And again, we're going to get a little more into that. But the interesting thing is OpenAI runs more like a startup. So it is very much like go fast and break things. So if you are wanting to be out on the bleeding edge, wanting to be out at the very front of technology, ChatGPT is going to be running about 6-ish weeks ahead of what Microsoft Copilot is. Now, 6 weeks is not that much. If you live, work, and hang out in a Microsoft environment, Copilot probably makes more sense for you because it's there. And 6 weeks isn't really that big of a difference. So it's really just more for the nerd people like me who like tinkering with whatever's the newest version. OpenAI does absolutely have that over Copilot, but Microsoft invested $10 billion, like billion with a B, into OpenAI. And so they have all of OpenAI's models. They just run them a little behind to make sure they're safe, secure, and not going to cause any issues. If you don't work in a Microsoft environment, if you work in a Google environment, so you use things like Gmail or Slides or any kind of their version, the Google version of Office, Gemini is a better fit for you, because what Gemini does is basically what Copilot does. It lives and exists inside of the Google environment, where Copilot lives and exists inside of the Microsoft environment. Anthropic is backed by Amazon. Their large language model Claude is exceptionally good. It sounds more human, it's more articulate, but there's some security risks there, and it's also incredibly opinionated, which means, and I don't mean opinionated in terms of like right wing, left wing, I mean opinionated in terms of they think this is the right way that an AI should sound. So if it doesn't sound like you like it, you really can't tweak it or change it like you can the other models. And then Meta, or most of us still probably call Meta Facebook, they've released Meta.ai. It is outstanding for just a free version. So if you're just looking to dip your toes into it, you just want to play a little bit, Meta.ai is free, and it's better than all the other free models. It's not as good as the paid versions whenever you get to that point. But again, like if you're just looking for free versions, Meta.ai, and that is the website, www.meta.ai, is really the best place to just kind of go and play around until you get to a point where like, hey, I want to pay for this. And then you're probably looking more at like an OpenAI's ChatGPT or Microsoft's Copilot.
Great. Just a question real quick for everyone in the audience. You have this term here, trains on your data. Could you just briefly explain what that means to train it and why that's a concern?
Yeah. And so I'm gonna maybe just kind of punt that a little bit to where I talk about some of the risks here in a couple of slides. But the short version is whether or not that input, that information that you put in, is then used to make the system better. So OpenAI's their Teams and Enterprise version, Microsoft's Copilot, any paid version, if you have a Microsoft license, they're not training on your data. They're not using the information that you put in to make their system better. If you're using free versions of anything, they 100% are using your information to make their systems better. And even the paid versions of Gemini and Claude do that as well.
So that, just to be explicit, so your data then becomes part of their system at that point.
That's right. It becomes part of like the corpus of all the information that exists on their servers and on their platforms.
Thanks.
Yep. And perfect segue into how to apply security and governance to protect your organization. As I mentioned up front, I have been in the AI space my entire adult life. I love AI. Most of my experience comes from being either a CIO or a CTO, running teams, implementing these kinds of things. So this isn't at all to scare anybody, but I do think it's important to understand the risks and how to mitigate those risks, because I want you to be able to use AI, and I want organizations to be able to take them as much advantage of AI as possible. And if you get in a spot where things go sideways, maybe there is an issue, that will derail what I hope is a really successful implementation for you. So I'm going to just get into here what are some of the big risks, and there are really two key risks. Patrick was mentioning in terms of training on data, that's an input risk, like what we're putting in, there's a risk there, and there's an output risk, what's coming from the system back to us. And so in order to be able to mitigate those risks, we just need to understand that so we can implement AI in a really good way that will be beneficial to our companies, as opposed to setting ourselves up for potential problems that would derail our ability to take full advantage of AI. So when we're talking about input risks, we're talking about putting something into a system that trains on your data. So again, this is not a concern if you're running Microsoft's Copilot and you have a Microsoft account. Now, if you're on the free version of Microsoft, they do train on your data. This is not a concern if you're running the Teams or the enterprise version of ChatGPT, but all other versions, any free version, or like we mentioned earlier, Claude, Gemini, or Meta, they are all going to train on your data. So if you put proprietary information in there, if you put your business plans, if you put PII, any kinds of privacy things that you really wouldn't want, I know it's probably not to the extent of being on the front page of the newspaper, but it is very much to the extent of it is surfaceable and able to be discovered if it goes into the system. So we want to be very careful when we're using systems that train on your data, what kind of information we're putting in there. The biggest mitigation strategy is not actually on here, and that's using either ChatGPT's Teams or Enterprise version or Microsoft's Copilot, because then you're not worried about it. They're not training on your data, they're not storing your data, they're not using your data. But if you are using one of those other platforms, and there are reasons to use those other platforms, if you have sensitive data, you're going to want to anonymize it. Now, whether that's taking names out and replacing them with cartoon characters, or reworking some of the social security numbers or telephone numbers, putting 555 in, those types of things, you want to anonymize any kind of sensitive data that's going into a system that is going to train on the information that you put into it. And then it's very important to establish data governance policies and then audit those policies. The first thing I'm very fortunate, I get to talk to a lot of organizations about how to effectively implement AI into their systems. The first thing that I always say is you need a policy. The second thing that I say is nobody is going to read your policy. So you need a policy in place so that way people know, and there are, I say nobody, there are people who will read it and will understand it, but you also need training behind it. What a lot of organizations have done that I really like is they say, hey, we love AI. We think AI is going to make your job a lot better. We think AI is going to allow you to be more effective. And the studies back that up. People like their jobs more. People feel more confident when they're able to use AI. And so these organizations want their employees to be able to use it, but they're asking them to go through a training course, just a short, usually like 45 minutes, just so you understand not just how to use it, but how not to use it. And so that's a really good mitigation strategy. And then going back through and making sure that you are or your teams are continuing to follow those guidelines and those things that you've put in place, really to make your whole organization better. The other risk is an output risk, and the really euphemistic or nice way to say that AI makes junk up is in the AI space we call it a hallucination. And so what that is AI is not very good at saying I don't know. If you ask it a question, it's going to give you an answer. Probably one of the more famous recent examples of that is there was a lawyer who went to present a case to a judge. He used ChatGPT to cite case law. 3 of the 5 cases were actual cases, cited correctly, working correctly, had all the right information. 2 of them were made up whole cloth. They were nothing. They didn't exist, but they looked right and they were formatted correctly. So of course, in this case, the judge goes and looks them up, validates it, realizes that those don't exist, holds the lawyer in contempt of court, and fines the law firm. So that is a real world example of how easy it is to be tricked, because the information does look right. The research looks correct. The quotes look like they actually are quoted, but lack of human oversight can have a real issue here. And there are biases, and we would be naive to say there aren't biases that are in the system and that are in the AI systems. There's biases on the data that it's trained on, and there's biases on the people trying to take those biases out. So there's kind of 2 types that there are biases. And so the way that we can mitigate these risks, put a human in the loop. I'm not saying to use an extra person, an oversight if you're writing an email, or if you're using it to help you write a social media post, or a lot of the things that we would all use AI. There's no reason to complicate that more than cool. You're using AI to help you knock that out quicker. That's great. But if you're doing something that matters, something that actually affects people's lives, so you're using it to say, make a hiring decision, or you're using it to determine loan, whether or not you're going to loan somebody a money or some kind of a housing type of a thing. You just can't trust AI to be accurate all the time. The truth is it's accurate most of the time. It's accurate about 95% of the time if you look at the studies, but still that's 1 out of every 20 times that it's going to create an adverse result for somebody unfairly. So having a human in the loop, having some person there to make sure that those types of critical decisions are good and valid and thought through, it is really important. When we say red teaming outputs, what we're talking about there is having a group of people, and maybe it's just you, that goes through and asks the AI a lot of common questions and sees what the outputs are, and then makes adjustments if those outputs aren't what you expected or are more negative. So a real good example of this would be if you turned on Copilot and it's running in your entire tenant. And so all of a sudden, Copilot today, the way it works is it eats everything that's in your tenant. And so where you might have had some security through obscurity, you might have had some security because people just didn't know it was out there and they had access to it. That goes away with AI. So if there was a human resources document on maybe a performance improvement plan, or there was some salary information that just existed off in some random folder somewhere that nobody's ever actually going to find, all of a sudden that's very easy to find using AI and just asking the AI that question and getting that information back. So going through and red teaming that and looking for outputs that you don't want the information to come back to you is a real important step whenever you're implementing AI internally. And then just establishing clear lines of accountability. So who's the final decision? Because in the end, it is not AI's fault nor AI's responsibility to make the right decision. It comes back to us, it comes back to the person. And so understanding that, yes, AI may help us. Patrick talked a lot about, and it is incredibly valuable. I imagine for me personally, it's about a 50% gain on my week. I know I can easily get 60 to 70 hours worth of work done in 40 hours today using AI. And so it's incredibly valuable. But I also know in the end, anything that I put out there using AI is not AI. Just like that lawyer, I can't blame ChatGPT. I can't blame Copilot for the things that I'm putting out into the world. Those are on me. And so understanding that, especially when it comes to any critical AI-driven decisions, there needs to be somebody there who is responsible and is accountable for that information that comes from AI. So I'll kick this back over to I don't know if Patrick or Erik, we wanted to talk through this quickly, just some real good ways to get started.
Well, I'd actually like just to comment on that question right there. Is like where to start.
Okay,
and I think Greg brought up a couple key points there in the latter part, which was about and to make sure that you're not going to accidentally, reveal some data that previously in a folder somewhere was private and now the organization. And I think even that step before red team, and Greg and I've talked about this, is when you think about AI readiness, is really talking about and assessing for example, where your data is. Like just to step back and say, do we actually have a grasp of where our information is and who has access to it? And I've seen this in organizations as we're consulting with them on preparing them for co-pilot, future co-pilot advantages they're going to get on their own data. And it turns out they really don't know. There really is no documentation. These are large organizations, right? Who owns it? Has it been maintained well, and so forth? So AI readiness, this idea of kind of looking at your current environment and documenting it to some level, have some understanding where you're at. That's a great starting place. And maybe this is a good point to kind of kick into some of these other questions. But if there's nothing else you take away from today, which hopefully you take away a lot, is to say, okay, don't go, great, we'll make that a 2026 initiative. Like, no, absolutely not. Do an AI readiness, but instead of trying to do the whole organization, start a little bit smaller. Like take a department. I've seen this with finance. Finance loves the idea of what AI can do. I've seen this over and over again. They're very concerned about compliance and risk, but usually those teams are small and they know their data. So just think about just strategically where you might fit in the organization. Maybe it's not the biggest value, but it's a place where you could actually do this readiness as a pilot. Erik?
That's awesome. Thanks, Patrick. And I think it complements really well a question that we have here. So, lots of different ways to implement AI within an organization, whether you're talking about a bottom-up approach, which, requires some knowledge and engagement on the part of the staff to identify opportunities, or you're talking about a top-down approach more where, it still requires staff to get engaged and utilize the tools. The change management is often one of the hardest parts. There's a question here, how do you foster a culture of learning and curiosity across your organization when it comes to AI? And, kind of similar question, or to bounce off of that, where might you find resistance or skepticism, and how do you resolve that?
Greg, you want to take that first one?
Yeah, I'll take a swing at it. So as far as fostering a culture of innovation, I think Erik used the term change management. That's very much what we're dealing with here. So my background is a lot in like Six Sigma and Lean, and so very much like change management type things. The way to foster a culture of innovation, one, is being okay with failure, being okay with people screwing up, being okay with people experimenting, and rewarding even failure. Rewarding, hey, that's really great that you went out and you tried this and you gave it a really good go. I did a very deep dive into AI with one of our vice presidents at Arctic, and in the end, AI couldn't help, and that was okay because we figured out something else that it did. We figured out something that AI couldn't help with, and so I think being okay with negative outcomes. I think finding, and I think Erik, there's a second half of your question where you're talking about the resistance, finding your champions, from a change management point of view, because this is very much a who moved my cheese type of a moment. People's cheese is getting moved. And so finding your champions, finding people that love AI. I have yet to find an organization where nobody internally is using AI. They might not be supposed to using AI. They might have been told not to use AI, but there are people using AI. Find those people. Patrick mentioned starting on a small project. He mentioned finance. Finance is awesome. Marketing is also really well set up for this type of AI as well as human resources. So just any of those types of places, if you can find somebody, get a couple of wins, let them roll it out, and then they can easily start to talk about, because there will be people who are resistant. But once their peers, their coworkers start to say, hey, this is saving me 3-4 hours, all of a sudden that becomes a lot more palatable, especially if you're already feeling like you're stressed and stretched a little bit. Who wouldn't like getting 4, 8, 12 hours back a week? And so I think getting those champions in place, getting a couple of case studies that work, and having their employees' peers able to talk to them about some of the gains is the way you kind of combat that resistance that every organization is going to have.
If I can just add to that, just a comment of thought is in our own organization, so this is an organization of just technologists almost exclusively. What I found to work from a bottom up is teaching people using AI as a coaching tool, and just walking them through a procedure of how they would use AI as an assistant. Because I think there's an assumption that if you're into AI, and the truth is everyone's already busy. So especially for technology people, it feels like, oh gosh, another new tool. So just sitting them down during those, let's say weekly sessions or quarterly reviews, if you do those, sitting them down and say, okay, we have this initiative, let's see if AI can assist us here. And it's a very discreet way of using the idea. It's not very broad, start using AI. It's let's tackle this one task that you have and see if AI helps you make you better at that task. So another approach there, if you want to, instead of going after one department that bottoms up, that could work really well.
That's excellent. And along the same lines, a couple of people have asked the question here. So if I know nothing about AI and don't have any intuition yet around ChatGPT and how it works, what's a first step that I could take?
Oh wow, Greg, I'm gonna start a little bit, but I'm gonna give it back to you on that one because I think there's a lot of experiences on this, not just opinions, but experiences on this. And I think Greg alluded to this when he was talking about the various products out there, and I think Greg shared with me some really great examples of kind of the early tinkering that he did, even outside of the software development world, just at an individual level. And I think that's really where the answer is, and that's what enables your own your staff. So regardless of how technology savvy you are, with a little bit of education, you could start taking that AI tool and starting, especially and I strongly recommend a paid version. You'll really be able to feel more comfortable unlocking some of the capabilities of a Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT. But just getting in there and saying, let's look at some of the parts of my job today. Very tedious, right? But I know I have to do them. And so, and Greg and I have shared some of these experiences of how do we use these tools when we have to a lot of information quickly for people, and we want to make sure we haven't missed something and left something out. So just think about in your job day to day, okay, what part of my job could really use some help, something that takes a lot of time, and try to insert AI data and learn how to use it. Greg, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll give some thoughts, but I also want to kind of, because I think you're 100% correct on paid versus free. And we may have different reasoning, but I think we'll come to the same conclusion. And my big deal on paid versus free is I understand data security is a huge problem, but whenever I talk to people oftentimes, and if you're just getting started and just kind of try and figure out how to dip your toes and get going, one of the big gripes that I hear are, well, it doesn't answer questions like I thought, or it's not maybe quite as robust as I thought it was going to be. And I always, my next question is, well, what version of AI are you using? And almost always it's the free version of ChatGPT. That seems to be most people's kind of intro into, I mean, they're the fastest organization to ever 100 million users. They've got the just getting started kind of figured out. The problem is, and again, like, I'm not saying AI is sentient, I'm not saying AI is thinking, I'm not saying any of those types of things, but it can take an IQ test. And while it's not thinking, that at least gives you an idea of like what it knows. And so GPT 3.5, which is what the free version of ChatGPT runs on, it's a modified version of GPT 3, has an IQ, if it takes an IQ test, of around 81, which is not bad. I mean, if you think about it, that's really pretty impressive. It is the equivalent of about an orangutan's IQ. And so, that's an assistant that can help you do some stuff. It can help you knock some things out. But GPT-4 has an IQ on the same test of 150. So that's more like an Albert Einstein type of an IQ. And so if people get frustrated with the free version, the answers, it's likely because it isn't giving maybe the best answers, and give the paid version a try. One of the downsides of Microsoft Copilot is you have to buy a whole year at once. which hopefully they'll do away with and they'll go back to the month-to-month plan eventually. But yeah, I mean, start on the paid version and get going. But if you don't know a lot about AI, I think what Patrick said is right on. Just start thinking about tasks that you don't like, that take up a lot of time, that are kind of annoying. And you can almost always, I mean, honestly, I used to probably say Google, and Google is a great search engine, but the really great thing about AI is it's more of an answer engine. And so you can just ask an AI, ask ChatGPT, ask Copilot, like, how can I use AI to better answer an email? Or how can I use AI to help me come up with a marketing plan? And it'll actually go through, and it's a really good trainer. There's also an enormous amount of YouTube videos, very good YouTube videos. There's really good LinkedIn groups that you can jump in and join, really good solid AI LinkedIn groups that'll help. And there's a pretty large community, whether it's Reddit or various different communities online, of people just helping people. I think for a lot of us, this is new and it's exciting. The killer feature, like I said, like AI has been around about 50 years. The killer feature was whenever ChatGPT all of a sudden gave normal people that intro into, that UI into being able to use AI. And so a lot of people just want to help people. So find a community. I'm sure Patrick would say this. I definitely, hit me up on LinkedIn if you got a question. I think most of us would be more than happy to point you in the right direction anyway, for sure. And I'll just say Microsoft has, last thing is, Microsoft has a ton of getting started with Copilot information just on their website that's really solid as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just add a couple things just from personal experience. So, on the call it paid side, there are a lot of great academic institutions that have programs on AI, whether it's on the development side or the strategic side. So I've just finished the MIT AI implications for business strategy course. Very high level, not technical, but really great for a leader who's looking to figure out how do I facilitate AI implementation within my organization and what's a good viewpoint for that. Oxford has a great one, Cambridge, Stanford, UPenn. There are lots of schools that are really focusing on this. NSAID is another one that's really AI focused. And so that's another perspective you could take. Maybe you're not going to be the one tinkering, but you could help create a frame of reference that will help others do that effectively. The other thing that I would say is, this is all, to a large extent, this is an exercise in process improvement. As you said, Greg, a lot of your background is in Six Sigma and looking at processes. And so there is opportunity certainly to find ways to use AI to make to take away certain labor-intensive tasks right now, but there's also ways to completely redesign the process or add aspects to the process with no additional labor that improve the ultimate value that's delivered out of that process. And so, like, lots of different lenses through which to look at this, and you don't necessarily need to go the technical route on that. Let's see. Along the same lines, I'm trying to group the questions here. A few questions on risk, and so maybe the most general one here. Okay, you want people to get engaged on this, become familiar, tinker. How do you balance? How do leaders balance the need for AI innovation and experimentation with the potential risks of data privacy, security, accuracy? Can you share some intuition around how leaders can think about that balance?
Yeah, I'll start on that one. So that was kind of the point of what I was trying to make with my kind of portion is, and hopefully, Patrick or Eric, you guys can chime in. But I mean, having a policy, I'm beating a dead horse here a little bit, but having a policy in place, letting people go through training so they understand the risks, and then letting them go. And I think trusting your employees. I think it's your responsibility as a leader to help people understand the risks, help people understand how to use those systems in the right place, and then also to have hired people that you trust to do a good job, right? And so that's kind of where I come from, is they may not know the risks, and that's not fair to put an expectation on somebody who doesn't understand or doesn't know something. But if you explain the risks, I think for the most part, you'll be really happy with the results of your team if you just let them run inside of kind of those guardrails and understanding those guardrails. So get a policy in place, get some training in place, and then let people start figuring it out on their own would be what I would say.
Yeah, and I would add, when we ask the question of risk, my head goes to enterprise risk management, or ERM, and this idea that as an organization, you've defined around a framework, you've defined what is acceptable and unacceptable risk, and the way that gets implemented within the organization so that you can evaluate and measure it is, do we have policies and do we have a way to help people monitor those policies? And I want to come back to the example of working with an individual or taking it on and piloting yourself and learning a little bit about this. And I think this is the nuanced portion of what Greg talked about, which is, hey, the free versions work well for your own individual discovery, but I think that's where that's a very sensitive line to cross. Discover in the free version becomes very difficult to control if you allow the usage of that free version across your organization. And in no way, I think, was Greg indicating that you would. I think that's what we learned, like inside our organization, when I was thinking, why isn't everyone using this? They were actually very sensitive to risk. Bless them for that. They're very sensitive to risk, and we had to start putting the paid versions in their hands and start rolling that out carefully. So on the risk management side, there's nothing different. AI is no different than anything else, right? There are risks. Define those risks. Define your policy, educate people on it, and then create a small pilot with the right kinds of tools that are aligned to your risk profile.
Thanks a lot to you both for that insight. And related question, so we talked a little bit about data privacy, security. Obviously, accuracy was part of that question, and transparency is a critical feature to get to know you have accurate information, have confidence in the information. So one of the questions here is, how transparent are AI platforms about the data sources they're trained on? In other words, is there a place in the UI, or can you ask, show me where you learned what you know, and it'll actually show you the location of the data sources? How do you verify?
Yeah, well, I'll let Greg speak to this a little bit. I just want to comment on the part of when doing research. It is possible when you're what's called prompts. When you're telling the system what you want it to do, or what you want to know about, or what you want it to write. You would then specifically ask it to provide original source content, where that content came from. And so like in authoring, when I'm doing research and using AI, I'm asking it to source it. And then I'm saying, like that source data you found, I'm going to go read that because I haven't seen this source data. Is it is it valid, or was it all made up? And so there's still that, and I think this is the where human assisted and then human integrated approach with AI. This is where you're starting to cross these lines of, is it just an assistant, or is it an essential part of the job itself? And it still requires that human oversight component of it. So I do, there is a part of this just a simplistic level for those who maybe aren't very deep into the technology, just ask sources and then following up on those sources. Greg?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So the broader question of the data that it was trained on, like, are they going to expose that? Meta does. Meta's platform is totally open source. Nobody else will. That is their secret sauce. That's what makes their engines as good as they are. And so they are not going to explain. You can gather some information, gather some data. One of the companies has recently acquired all the information from Reddit, and so almost all of them have consumed all the information from the internet, or eaten as much of the internet as they possibly could. But they're not going to expose exactly where all that information is coming from directly, except for Meta. To Patrick's point, a funny story. So I have a white paper on risk that we're actually going to offer here at the end. And so whenever I was researching that, I was using AI to help me write it, and I asked it to help with sourcing, or exactly what Patrick said, like, where does this come from? And it says, I'm sorry, it doesn't come from anywhere. And so yeah, that was a really good way to check and see, like, hey, they just made this up. And so there is a way to kind of use that and to do it. Microsoft, I will say Copilot is exceptionally good at, like, actually sometimes will have a lot of sources at the bottom, links you can go click on and follow. They're the only one that I'm aware that does that. But all of them will do exactly what Patrick says. Like if we say, hey, where's this information come from? They will go back and try to find the source, or they'll, like in the case of what I was saying, or say, it doesn't exist anywhere. So I'm sorry about that. So, but yeah, asking it is probably the best way to validate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also the whole concept of explainable AI, and it seems like the models are getting better at not only articulating their sources, but also like sharing the logic essentially that was used to come up with the ultimate product. And so, huge, I think, improvements that are happening on the explainable AI front too, which will be helpful there. Similar question, but kind of more specific to ChatGPT. The question reads, Greg mentioned that teams and enterprise versions of ChatGPT don't train on your data. How would you evaluate the data privacy risk for a paid individual ChatGPT account with the training data option turned off? So is that possible, I guess, is the first question, and then anything else you want to say about that?
I don't know would be the answer. If that is a feature, that is a feature that they've added in the last few weeks, because for the longest time, the paid personal version they trained on. So if they give you the ability to turn it off, you can turn it off and it'll be just like the other versions. It'll be just like the other versions of ChatGPT, the enterprise and teams versions. I did not, candidly, I did not know you could turn that off. And if you could, and I checked on this maybe a month ago, so that would be a relatively new thing that they've done. But if they have, then you have the exact same risk. I wouldn't say no risk. There's no such thing as no risk, but you'd have the exact same risk as a Microsoft paid Copilot or the Google or the ChatGPT Teams or Enterprise. But I did not know that feature existed. And I've made a note. I'm going to go check that out as soon as we jump off this call here.
Yeah, I was actually just looking it up, and it looks like that might now be the case, which again just says to stay up on AI, it's a daily occurrence, right? And so that's why it's great to have partners like this that are living in that world constantly, because these things update all the time. And maybe related question it kind of brings up for me is, so okay, they say they're not training on your data. Can you know? Is there some technical capability that can verify that, or are we essentially putting our faith in that institution that they're doing what they say they're doing?
Wow, man, I love that question. There's a mid-April, I think it was April 14th, New York Times did an investigative study about what these companies were doing with data. And I think if you haven't looked at this article around what large tech companies have done with data and their own policies, like what the policy was 3 months ago, and then suddenly on a Friday night the policy changes and they start using your data. I think to know what you think that these companies are going to do, and this article speaks to this. It's very interesting, which is in order to be the leader in this space globally. Right. This is the Wild Wild West, right? This is looking for gold, if you will. In order to be the leader right now, you want to consume as much data in the world as possible as fast as you can, because that's what, in theory, not in theory, in practice, that's what makes your model better, right? It makes you the best. So these companies are running out of data. So right now, all the data in the world up to the current moment, they're going to exhaust the ability to digest that data by, what is it, Greg? I've read 2 different articles, mid 2025, early 2026.
Yeah, I've heard mid 2025, but I probably just haven't seen the other article. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think more recently they're saying they're consuming even faster than some of the older articles are consuming even faster. So they're running out of things to be the leader, to be the top leader. So I think that's an indication of, and by the way, this is across a number of companies that have done this. And in that, I think you read it, let the article speak for itself in terms of its evidence about what the New York Times found. But at the end of the day, the integrity of the company, it's around the ethics, it's around, are they really designed for consumer, designing for business? And I think Greg, you've spoken about that a couple of times about Microsoft, and maybe you can kind of add to that.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Like, there's a reason why Siri is a worse digital assistant than all the other digital assistants, and then because they don't. Apple is incredibly like locked down, but they don't have all that data. They don't have all that information, so it doesn't perform as well as the other digital assistants on the market. And so, to Patrick's point, they are going to want to consume as much data as they can. I do think there's some real, like, not just like corporate risk, but like company killing risk to if they would just straight violate their terms. You would be talking about enormous like federal government level type intervention if they said, hey, we're not training on your data, we're not using your data, and then all of a sudden they started doing that. I do think, to Patrick's point, staying updated on the terms. I don't think Microsoft will ever train on the paid versions of the data just because
Yeah.
it's too big of a risk. It's just too big of a risk. I mean, they're a $1 trillion company with like a T. They're not going to risk losing their entire company over just training on data whenever they said they're not going to. Now they will 100% train on the free version of the data, but I think what we'll see is more agreements where they're paying organizations to get their data. But the Metas, the Googles, they're going to train on your data. They are 100% going to train on your data. I don't anticipate the ones that say they're not going to. I'd be shocked maybe if they're lying about it just because of the massive amount of risk they'd expose themselves to.
So, if the number of questions we have is an indication of the level of engagement in this conversation, it's really high. And there are a ton of questions, but with, call it 6 minutes left, and then 2 for wrap up here. The majority of these questions are about use cases that you either have or are implementing. And so, either of you want to share some of the top use cases that you're identifying?
Yeah, so I'd say within the organization, right, without getting into building products or apps or any of that. So this is just within operations. The 2 places that we've been actively using it for some time now. One is looking at the sales analysis. So allowing the AI to interpret how meetings go, interpret how the customer, what the customer is thinking, whether they're going to purchase, but also using the data to infer where your sales staff might need coaching around what they do. So that's really opened up a different dialogue in terms of performance management. It's completely changed the we talked about culture earlier. Talk about shifting culture around outlets. And now, I think what any good sales leader would tell you, yeah, that's what you really want. You want near-term, real-time coaching. The question is, how do you scale that? And the AI helps you scale that. So that's a real place that has been very advantageous for us. And then I think right now, although we've done a lot on the data analytics side, I think the other place that has actually been practically very helpful is, as I mentioned before, on project management. We're in a space where people need to invest in technology, but there's always constraints, there's always delay. So we have to find places to be better, to be more effective, to be more efficient, to make those projects execute on time and execute within budget. So that would be the other places, practically looking at all aspects of that business process within project planning and inserting AI and continually asking the team and expecting the team to continually to innovate and evolve how they're using AI. So not just a one-time, oh, we made it better, but constantly doing the work assisted with AI.
Yeah, I just kind of piggyback on that because I think when we're talking about generative AI specifically, the AI that we're talking about, the ChatGPTs and the Copilots. Anytime you're writing anything, AI can help with you. And so some real examples that I've done in the last month or help people do: HR writing job descriptions, HR writing job listings for openings inside of the company. AI is really good at that. Marketing, and so if you want to create, it's actually pretty good at helping you write long form content. So you want to write a blog post, you want to write something like that. And then even on top of that, and I think where it gets really kind of powerful is taking that long form content and slicing and dicing it up into a bunch of short form content. So slicing that blog post up into a whole bunch of different social media posts, LinkedIn or Twitter or I guess X or Instagram or Pinterest, and creating all that. And then also analyzing which of those free social posts are performing and then recognizing that and then being able to turn those into advertisements. And so kind of that whole, you could go from a blog post to having a very effective ad that's all done. AI can handle all of that. And I'll give like one quick example because I was just working on this yesterday. Internally at Arctic, on the Arctic IT side of our business, we do a lot of government contracting, things like that. One of the deals that we do a lot of is we have project managers, and Patrick talked a lot about project management, but our project managers will often create user stories, like giving the developers information on what they need to write. So like, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Let's create a whole bunch of user stories that we can give to software developers for them to solve and iterate through. And what used to take one of our project managers who was helping me, he said it used to take him 6 to 8 hours. It's now taking him 2 to 3 to get those out. And I think you can multiply that throughout. And so that was something he was writing. And I think that's, again, kind of going back to that. Is somebody writing something? Is somebody creating some content? There's probably a way to augment that with AI.
Without a doubt, couple thoughts from conversations with others on the topic. One, people tend to, I think, be skeptical about the ethics around, having AI write my content. And a couple thoughts with respect to that. One way we use it, to your point, Greg, is the repurposing of content. So if you have a white paper, this great body of knowledge, turning it into several other forms, right? So it's not building the substance, but it's helping you just change the form into 8 other forms, so to speak, that you want to deliver that same substance that you have developed. That's an effective way to use it. And also, it's human in the loop. There's also computers in the group. And so, right, if you've developed something great, you're getting good ideas and thoughts and resources to look at through AI, but ultimately that's just information for you to validate as you're developing yours. And so there's a great case where a recent AI that was developed to look at scans and early detect cancer. It had a 7% error rate when looking at this universe of scans. The doctor had a 3% error rate. So you might say, well, the doctor's better. Why are we using the AI? Well, if you pre-scan with the AI and then the doctor reviewed, the error rate went down to 0.5%, right? So you're improving the quality just by having AI be a participant in the process, but not taking any of its inputs as fact, right? And so it could just facilitate the process. And so, with that, other questions we have here, we'd love to chat with you offline. 2 things to mention. One, there are 2 great resources, those white papers that we were referencing, that have been developed by our esteemed panelists here today. They're available both by reaching out to the respective organizations or simply in the GoToWebinar interface. There's a little tab for, handouts? Yeah, handouts. And so you could download both of them that way by PDF. I really appreciate our 2 panelists being with us here today. The insight and the kind of tip of the spear experience that you have, it's been invaluable. I know our audience is thankful for it, and thank you to our audience as well. A lot of things to be done during the day, and you invested the time to be here with us for an hour. And so I hope you found the discussion to be energizing, engaging, and useful. We're trying to build a community here, to implement AI and really find ways to drive value to our customers and members and other stakeholders through the use of it. So we're really appreciative of you all being a part of our community here today. Thank you all, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Eric. Great, Patrick. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, and thank you for everyone who attended today. We'll get the recording out to you shortly. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks all.